Good morning, everybody, and welcome. Our guest speaker today doesn't really need any introduction. He's been a very popular speaker here over the years and is a very dear friend of the center. But for newcomers, here's his bio. Jeffrey is the Carl W. Zeigler Professor of Religion, Philosophy and Asian Studies at Elizabethtown College, where he's taught since receiving his doctoral degree at the University of Chicago Divinity School in the year 2000. He's written many books and articles, including Hinduism in America, A Convergence of Worlds, which won the Rajinder and Jyoti Gandhi Award for Theology, Philosophy, and Critical Engagement in 2022. His latest book, Discovering Indian Philosophy, was published earlier this year. He's spoken at a wide variety of venues, including 3 presentations at the United Nations. He's also been interviewed for a PBS documentary on the life and teachings of Swami Vivekananda and for the History Channel series Holy Marvels. Dr. Long took initiation into the Vedanta tradition in the year 2005 and frequently speaks at Vedanta societies across the United States. Jeffrey, welcome.
Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya, Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya, Mrityor Ma Nritangamaya, Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Lead us from the unreal to the real, lead us from darkness to light, lead us from death to immortality. Om Peace, Peace, Peace. Om Akashat Patitam Toyam Yatha Gachati Sagaram Sarvadeva Namaskaraha Keshavam Pratigachati. Just as the rain falls and makes its way to the ocean, so do our prayers to all the gods make their way to the infinite. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. I wanted to include that last verse from the Mahabharata, from the Shanti Parvan of the Mahabharata, because it's very appropriate to today's topic. So, namaste, namaskar, good morning, everyone. It's again my great privilege to speak here at the Vedanta Society of New York, established by Swami Vivekananda himself in 1894, and ably led today by Swami Sarvapriyananda and his great team, including Diane and many others of you who are here today. So thank you as always for your kind welcome. As we gather here today in the presence of Sri Ramakrishna, the Holy Mother, and Swami Vivekananda, we have a great sense of serenity, a tiny glimpse of the bliss of the infinite that is our birthright. And yet we feel some disquiet as well, knowing we live in a world in which we're constantly hearing of conflict, war, terrorism, torture, genocide, and the ongoing degradation of our precious natural environment. Our Vedanta tradition reassures us that this world, with all its troubles, is not our final destination. It is, in the words of Swamiji, a grand moral gymnasium wherein we have all to take exercise so as to become stronger and stronger spiritually. We take heart in the idea that through setting aside our egos and doing our best to solve the problems before us, we will draw ever nearer to our goal of realization. Putting forth our best effort, but, as Swamiji reminds us, without attachment for the results, leads us to the highest realization of the perfection of the soul. One of the most powerful tools we have, I believe, for working to move the world beyond its current state of conflict, that is the problem that is before us, is also one of the central teachings of the Vedanta tradition as taught by Sri Ramakrishna, the Holy Mother Sharada Devi, and Swami Vivekananda, that is Dharma Samanvaya, or the harmony of religions. It's a topic on which I've spoken and written many times, and I continue to return to this teaching because I find it not only intellectually fascinating, but also deeply compelling and deeply hopeful, a beacon in a world grown dark with conflict. In fact, the harmony of religions is one of the main ideas that attracted me to the practice of Vedanta many years ago. Growing up Catholic in rural Missouri and being told on multiple occasions by others that I was going to hell for belonging to what they considered the wrong religion, it always struck me as deeply arbitrary that a loving God would only save those who happened to belong to a particular religion, perhaps even limiting the gift of salvation to those who belong to a particular sect of that religion, as my Christian fundamentalist friends believed. Right? They didn't consider Catholics proper Christians. I'm sure that these friends were quite sincere in their concern for the fate of my soul when they gave me these warnings. I do not believe they acted out of hatred or malice, even as they insulted my religion, while also condemning for eternity billions of human beings who did not share their views. I don't believe they were evil, but I'm quite certain they were wrong. Why would God create billions of people, knowing these people would be damned forever for following the wrong religion? In effect, creating them to damn them. Such a God would not be loving, nor even just, but cruel and capricious. Really no God at all, but a sadistic celestial tyrant. In my early teenage years, when I began to explore Hindu traditions and came upon the idea of harmony of religions, it immediately made sense to me. It was like a great relief to read these words. I found the idea first in a book of quotations from Mohandas Gandhi, who said, quote, "Religions are different roads converging upon the same point. What does it matter that we take different roads so long as we reach the same goal? In reality, there are as many religions as there are individuals. I believe in the fundamental truth of all great religions of the world. I believe that they're all God-given, and I believe they were necessary for the people to whom they were revealed. And I believe that if only we could, all of us, read the scriptures of different faiths from the standpoint of the followers of those faiths, we should find that they were at bottom all one and all helpful to one another." This statement resonated with me and continues to do so today. It resonates with the wisdom I find as I study many religions and the goodness I find in people of many religions and of no religion. It is consistent with the idea of a God who desires the liberation of all from suffering, a God who dwells within all of us, drawing us ever nearer to true freedom. Continuing my studies, I came to the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna, who not only affirmed that many religions could lead to the highest realization, but also claimed that he had attained that highest realization himself through following many paths. As explained in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, "I have practiced," said he, "all religions, Hinduism, Islam, Christianity, and I have also followed the paths of the different Hindu sects. I have found that it is the same God toward whom all are directing their steps, though along different paths. The substance is one under different names, and everyone is seeking the same substance. Only climate, temperament, and name create differences. Let each one follow his own path. If he sincerely and ardently wishes to know God, peace be unto him, he will surely realize him." This, too, I found deeply compelling, for Sri Ramakrishna adds the essential element of direct experience to the conversation. While Gandhi affirms the faith that many religions can lead their practitioners to the highest goal, Sri Ramakrishna puts this faith to the test, conducting in the form of his multiple sadhanas rooted in many traditions, the ultimate experiment with truth, to borrow another phrase from Gandhi. He thereby found ultimate reality revealed to him in the many forms and manifestations presented by these traditions. Of course, unless we have ourselves carried out this experiment, as Sri Ramakrishna did, our own belief that many paths can lead to the ultimate goal remains a matter of faith. Faith that Sri Ramakrishna did indeed experience what he claimed to experience. But such a faith need not be blind. There are good reasons to believe that what Sri Ramakrishna is saying is true. The appeal of the idea of the harmony of religions for me involves multiple elements. One, as I've already been suggesting, is that this idea is consistent with the idea of a loving God who, rather than creating beings in order to damn them, saving only those who practice the right religion, instead reveals saving truths widely around the world, making these truths available to persons of all cultures, all parts of the world, all eras of history. A God, to paraphrase Sri Ramakrishna, the wind of whose divine grace is always blowing everywhere. It is only for us to raise our sails and catch the wind, allowing it to transform our consciousness and carry us to our ultimate goal. Apart from this theological reasoning, there's another aspect of the harmony of religions that I also find compelling. This is one what might call, in a very loose way, its scientific character. What I mean by that is that just as there are truths about the physical world that are available for all of us to know through reason reflecting on our sensory experience, what we call the scientific method, there are also truths about the spiritual realm that must be similarly available to all who inquire into them. In other words, just as gravity is a real thing, whose discovery was arguably inevitable. Someone would have figured it out eventually. Isaac Newton did, but someone would have figured it out. It must also be the case that if realities such as what we are variously calling God, divinity, transcendental consciousness, spirit, soul, Atman, Brahman, Jiva, Sansara, if these really exist, then they also will be discoverable by human awareness. Indeed, they may even reveal themselves, as many traditions teach. The terms in which these realities are described, and many of the specific attributes given to them, will certainly vary across cultures, geographic regions, and historical epochs. Similarly with scientific discoveries, they've been made simultaneously or at different times, but in various parts of the world, but always explained in the terminology of the culture where they're discovered. But again, if these things are real and they have a certain definite character, just like the physical universe does, the contours of that character should be discernible across religious and philosophical boundaries. Another way of saying this is that if you are what in philosophy we call a metaphysical realist, then the harmony of religions follows. Because God, or whatever term you want to use, it's just there. Right? It's there, it is what it is, and we are perceiving and discerning it in the various means that we are. But if we deny that, then we're suggesting somehow maybe that this is just something that one culture or one civilization came up with. And that's not really a religious perspective, it's not really a spiritual perspective. And yet it has invaded spiritual perspectives, as we see. Early in my search, after reading the words of Gandhi and Ramakrishna, I came across another thinker who also articulated the understanding I've just been describing, that there are universal truths that can be discerned within and which cut across the boundaries of the world's great wisdom traditions. I'm speaking, of course, of Aldous Huxley and the idea of the perennial philosophy. As Huxley describes it beautifully in the first few lines of his classic book, The Perennial Philosophy, Philosophia perennis. The phrase was coined by Leibniz, but the thing, the metaphysic that recognizes a divine reality substantial to the world of things and lives and minds, the psychology that finds in the soul something similar to or even identical with divine reality, the ethic that places man's final end in the knowledge of the immanent and transcendent ground of being, the thing is immemorial and universal. Immemorial and universal. Or as we might say in Sanskrit, Sanatana. Huxley was, of course, an adherent of Vedanta, being a disciple of Swami Prabhavananda of the Vedanta Society of Southern California. The philosophy Huxley describes as immemorial and universal is easily recognizable as Vedanta, the metaphysic that recognizes a divine reality, Brahman, substantial to the world of things and lives and minds, the psychology that finds in the soul something similar to or even identical with divine reality, the non-duality of Brahman and Atman, and the ethic that places man's final end in the knowledge of the immanent and transcendent ground of all being, in the realization of the true nature of the infinite and our non-dual relationship with it. The harmony of religions, then, as I understand it, is the idea that there are certain universal truths, as Huxley describes, that these truths are discernible throughout the world's religions and philosophies, and that these truths can be put into practice, in principle, by anyone, anywhere, regardless of their religious identity, their cultural background, their lineage, so long as they're willing to adhere to the necessary disciplines for refining consciousness in the way needed to confirm these truths through direct experience. And this is what Huxley chronicles throughout the perennial philosophy. Such discipline, called in our tradition sadhana or yoga, can be seen as analogous to the training that a scientist undergoes to study the physical cosmos. And indeed, it involves many of the same mental habits. This idea of a universal truth present in many traditions is one I find, as I've said, to be compelling and true. It's grounded my ongoing studies and spiritual practices with the understanding that all these religious ideas are not merely arbitrary or subjective. They are rational tools for perceiving reality, but operating from different conceptual matrices. In addition to finding the idea of the harmony of religions philosophically attractive, it's also my firm conviction that this is an important idea for our world today. As Swami Vivekananda said in his welcome address at the 1893 Parliament of the World's Religions, words that are as true today as in 1893, maybe more so. Sectarianism, bigotry, and its horrible descendant fanaticism have long possessed this beautiful earth. They've filled the earth with violence, drenched it often and often with human blood, destroyed civilization, and sent whole nations to despair. Had it not been for these horrible demons, human society would be far more advanced than it is now. As I read those words, it would be very easy to picture in your mind scenes from today's news, right, just flashing before you. Moreover, we live in an era in which these negative forces, these horrible demons, as Swamiji rightly named them, appear stronger than ever. If we combine the prevalence of sectarianism, bigotry, and fanaticism with the increasingly advanced technologies available to human beings to inflict harm on one another, then we have a deadly situation, potentially fatal to all of humanity and maybe to all life on this planet. Sorry to be a downer on a Sunday morning, but it's not over, right? There's hope, right? There is hope. It's therefore essential, given this situation, that ideals that logically compel us toward a greater appreciation of one another's traditions and worldviews should be cultivated and proclaimed across the globe, like the idea that there are important truths and insights to be found across the world's philosophies and religions. I'm speaking today of what I'm calling, and you might have noticed the title of my talk, The Limits of the Harmony of Religions, because this ideal has been subject to a great many misconceptions that have kept it from being more widely accepted than it is. Beyond these misconceptions, this ideal also raises some legitimate questions that need to be addressed if its potential for transforming humanity is to be realized. This is the aim of my talk today, to dispel misconceptions and at least begin to answer the questions raised by the harmony of religions. To really answer all of them, you would need a whole lecture series, but I'm going to, make a beginning of this today. When I speak of limits, I'm referring to the ways in which this ideal needs to be clarified. Its limits are those areas where it needs to be defined more precisely because it has come to mean many things to many people, and this has undermined its utility as an ideal, right? I could have also called my talk Clarifying the Harmony of Religions, because this is really what I'm about today. So, misunderstanding number one. Religions are not all the same. The most common misconception about the harmony of religions, and the easiest one to dispel, is the idea that those of us who affirm this ideal are saying that all religions are the same. This, however, is not what the harmony of religions entails. The very notion of harmony, if you think about what that word means, it involves the concept of difference. When voices and musical instruments perform in harmony, they're not all playing identical parts. To form a chord, one plays different notes, which produce music when they're played together at the same time. Harmony is the bringing together of different elements in a way that is pleasing and that creates something greater than simply the sum of the parts making it up. Religions are obviously different from one another. They teach many different things about the nature of reality. They enjoin very diverse practices. They even conceive of their ultimate goals differently. I've been using God language thus far. Some traditions don't use that language, but they're still talking about some transcendent reality. What the harmony of religions teaches is these differences don't have to be discordant, right? They can be harmonious. Pravajika Vrajaprana explains this very well in her wise little book, Vedanta, A Simple Introduction. Speaking of the harmony of religions, she writes, quote, "This is not to say that all religions are pretty much the same. That is an affront to the distinct beauty and individual greatness of each of the world's spiritual traditions. Saying that every religion is true and authentic doesn't mean that one can be substituted for the other like generic brands of aspirin." Vajraprana's typical sense of humor there. To be sure, There are many elements of the world's religions that overlap with one another. So there are parts that are the same. It's often been stated that some version of the golden rule, the ethical principle that we should treat others as we wish to be treated, is widespread among the world's religions. Prohibitions against murder, theft, and lying are common, as is the idea of some kind of survival of the person after the death of the body, and the idea of some higher being or principle that grounds the universe and gives life meaning, toward which or toward whom spiritual practice is directed. The contributions of the religions to our collective wisdom, however, are not limited to the elements they share. If this were the case, there'd be no need to study any tradition other than one's own. There would be nothing to learn from doing so. But, to again cite Pravajika Vajraprana, we can deepen our own spirituality and learn about our own tradition by studying other faiths. Just as importantly, by studying our own tradition well, we're better able to appreciate the truth in other traditions. Swami Vivekananda also speaks of the differences among traditions, dividing these into two kinds. There is, of course, on the one hand, the vast multitude of differences over details of practice and belief that arise, often in response to highly localized issues and concerns internal to the communities that uphold these traditions. These are often the topics around which the greatest conflicts emerge, not only between religious traditions, but also internally to the religions themselves. In fact, some of the most intense religious conflicts in history have been between sects of the same religion. But then there are the differences in the highest ideals taught by these traditions. And it is here that Swamiji sees the complementarity among religions. They do teach different ideals, but it's not at all clear that these ideals need to be in conflict. They can even be mutually supportive. In Swamiji's words, quote, "Are all the religions of the world really contradictory? I do not mean the external forms in which great thoughts are clad. I do not mean the different buildings, languages, rituals, books, etc. employed in various religions, but I mean the internal soul of every religion. Every religion has a soul behind it, and that soul may differ from the soul of another religion. But are they contradictory? Do they contradict or supplement one another? That is the question. I believe that they are not contradictory," he says. "They are supplementary. Each religion, as it were, takes up one part of the great universal truth and spends its whole force in embodying and typifying that part of the great truth. It is therefore addition, not exclusion. That is the idea. System after system arises, each one embodying a great idea, and ideals must be added to ideals, and this is the march of humanity." Pravajika Vajraprana gives some examples of these central ideals of the great traditions, which, again, do not contradict one another and can indeed be seen as complementary. She says, quote, "Every religion has a specific gift to offer humankind. Every religion brings with it a unique viewpoint that enriches the world. Christianity stresses love and sacrifice. Judaism, the value of spiritual wisdom and tradition. Islam emphasizes universal brotherhood and equality, while Buddhism advocates compassion and mindfulness. The Native American tradition teaches reverence for the earth and the natural world surrounding us. Vedanta, or the Hindu tradition, stresses the oneness of existence and the need for direct mystical experience." So the harmony of religions does not teach that all religions are the same. It teaches, rather, that there are truths in many religions. Some of these truths are shared in common among the religions, and some are distinct to, or maybe we could say they are distinctively emphasized in, a particular tradition or family of traditions. But religions are not the same, and they're not interchangeable. This leads us to our next question. Truth according to whom? The claim that truth can be found in many religions, of course, raises the question, truth according to whom? This brings us to the most important of the limits of the harmony of religions. The harmony of religions is an ideal that can be and that has been affirmed by wise persons of many traditions. You can find versions of this in Hinduism, in Buddhism, in Jainism, in Christianity, Judaism, Islam. It's an ideal at which one can arrive through a variety of routes of inquiry. But it is always an ideal that emerges from a definite point of view, with a definite location in history and culture. In our Vedanta tradition, the ideal of the harmony of religions emerges from the study of the core texts of this tradition, the Prasthanatraya, right? The Upanishads, the Brahma Sutra, and the Bhagavad Gita. as read through the lens of the experiences of Sri Ramakrishna, right? That's what makes our tradition distinctive. When the question of the truth of a given claim arises, a claim made by a religious tradition, a system of philosophy, or modern science, it is to be assessed based on what one already knows, right? This is basic epistemology, right? This is how we learn. We encounter something and we weigh it based on what we already know, based on our past experience. For those of us who take our stance in the Vedanta tradition of Sri Ramakrishna, certain things are already understood to be the case, right? We're not coming to this inquiry as blank slates. And this is, of course, true for the adherents of any established system of thought and practice, whether religious or not. Whenever we encounter a new truth claim, several options are possible. We might find that this is a claim that we already accept. So we can say that this is a point of harmony between our worldview and that of the other. We might find that it is a genuinely new claim for us, something we'd never thought of before. But even though we don't already accept it, we find upon deeper investigation that there's nothing in our worldview that really prevents us from accepting this new idea and making it our own, and there may be good reasons to adopt it. This is the growth, the adding of ideals to ideals, which Swami Vivekananda mentions. In this way, our view of reality expands and is enhanced through engagement with the views of others. A third possibility is that we might come upon a claim that we simply find puzzling. It is not clear upon investigation whether it's true or not. It may not be entirely consistent with what we already know, but it might contain some interesting possibilities that are worthy of further consideration. When I encounter such ideas, I put them on what I call my mental shelf. So to take that idea, okay, I don't accept it, I don't reject it, it's just there now, right, as a possibility. These ideas might remain on the shelf for an indefinite period. It may be that I never fully accept them, or it may be that further life experience, learning, and reflection prompt me to accept them and modify my view accordingly, or set them aside as something I cannot accept. And I can think of examples of all three of those, right? They're things I have accepted because maybe years later, after encountering the idea, I realize, that's where that fits. Other things like, okay, no, I think this is really just not right. And there's stuff still on the shelf. So that's the process. Finally, and importantly, there are ideas that are so utterly beyond the pale of my worldview that I simply cannot accept them at all. I'll give you some examples in a minute. This is important because it responds to another common misconception about the harmony of religions, which is that it contains no criteria for any negative judgments about the claims of the world's religions. It's the idea that if you just accept everything, basically, right? If it's impossible to reject a claim, anything is acceptable. If we say we believe many paths can lead to realization and that the religions of the world represent such paths, someone might well ask us, and I've had this conversation many times, what if my religion teaches me that I can reach God by killing people who disagree with me? This might sound like a crazy idea until we realize that these claims are out there, right? They've been there through human history, and there are people who still make these claims today. What if my religion teaches me that I can enslave other people? What if my religion teaches me that there are people who are lacking in any inherent divinity or dignity, and I can treat them in any way I wish with impunity? More to the point, what if my religion teaches me that only one path leads to realization and that all others are false and lead to damnation? Right? What if my religion contradicts the harmony of religions? What do we do then? Right? Clearly, there are views that are beyond the pale of the harmony of religions, right? I call this a limit of the harmony of religions, but I think it's actually an advantage, right? Because by accepting this idea that there's truth in many religions, we haven't just given up our ability to critically engage and to just say everything goes. No, everything does not go. What if my religion teaches me that I should go out and kill people? Well, you should see a psychiatrist. I mean, really, that is the answer to that. If we do not go to the extreme examples of claims that blatantly contradict the core values of Vedanta, like the ones I've just been mentioning, or claims that directly contradict the ideal of the harmony of religions, we can see that there are still a lot of issues left over where the world's religions just don't agree, right? And don't agree with each other and don't agree with Vedanta. And I'll give you my favorite example, which is another favorite topic of mine. That's the concept of rebirth, as it's often called in the Western world, reincarnation. It's something I'm convinced is real. That's another topic for a whole conversation, but let's just hold that for now. Sri Ramakrishna, Swami Vivekananda, and the Holy Mother all affirmed the reality of karma and rebirth, and these ideas are abundantly attested in Vedantic literature all the way back to the Upanishads. Right? These ideas are also affirmed in other traditions closely related to Hinduism, the Jain, Buddhist, and Sikh traditions, and the traditions of cultures going back to the ancient world. My Celtic ancestors believed in rebirth. Julius Caesar wrote about how he had such a hard time fighting the Gauls because their druids told them that if they died in battle, they'd just be reborn. And sounds like the advice of Arjuna, of Krishna to Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita. The ancient Greek sages, Pythagoras, Socrates, and Plato, to name only a few, affirmed this idea. There are, however, traditions that reject this idea specifically. The two religions that have the largest followings in the world, Christianity and Islam, both reject the concept of rebirth in their mainstream forms, though there are Christians and Muslims and their whole Christian and Muslim movements that affirm the ideal, which sort of anticipates something else I want to say shortly, which is that religions are complex. We can't think simplistically in terms of all Hindus believe this, all Muslims believe this, all Christians believe this. Gandhi was right. There are as many religions as there are individuals. Right? But if we're considering those forms of those traditions that reject the idea of rebirth, and if we as Vedantins accept the idea of rebirth, then logically we have to say that at least on that topic, they're wrong, right? So we're making a negative judgment. Now, maybe that doesn't make much difference in the long run, but it's important that we are able to say that. Several things, though, need to be mentioned in this regard. First, and this cannot be said enough in today's world of interreligious arguments on social media, religions are complexes of many ideas. In my experience, you don't typically find an adherent of any religious tradition who subscribes to every single idea that has ever been presented in the name of that religion. In fact, it would be impossible to do so because in the complex histories of religions that have lasted for many centuries and have been practiced by millions of people, contradictory claims arise. The same religion that says in one place that we should love one another might say in another place that we can reach God by killing people who disagree with us. As a result of this situation, sweeping judgments about religions being either true or false do not hold up under investigation. All we can say is that there are truths present in many religions, and that's why I keep phrasing it that way. You might have wondered, why doesn't he just say they're all true? Truth is present in many religions, but I would say that there is much that is false and problematic in all religions as well. This is the case even in the sacred texts of traditions, which is why Sri Ramakrishna famously and wisely said that the scriptures contain a mix of sand and sugar, right? We are never advised to simply blindly follow something that's written in a book, right? We have to test it with our reason, with our experience, with other things we know. It's also why one of the worst forms of interreligious argument, and I've seen this so often, and it's painful. My friend and colleague Kusamita Peterson's here today, and as religion scholars, it pains us whenever this happens. Someone picks some deeply objectionable verse from someone's scripture and takes it out of context and then says, this is what you think. So you have to believe this because it's in your sacred book. So your religion is bad. And then the other person is left either having to defend the indefensible or explain they don't really believe that, right? Or to, if they have the chance, to explain that it's being read out of context and without the mechanisms that tradition provides in order to understand it properly, right? I'm going to say something maybe potentially a little controversial here, but even people who claim to literally believe every word of their scripture don't really. And what I mean by that is that there is always some system of interpretation at work. And now, if we're talking about a great scholar, a great theologian, that system of interpretation, that mechanism might be very well thought out. In the various traditions of Vedanta, there were very well thought out approaches to how to read the Upanishads, for example. So in Advaita Vedanta, we have the Mahavakyas, right? These statements that, according to Shankaracharya, these are literally true, right? This is what you can accept. Everything else is meant to illustrate those. If you look at some of the Bhakti traditions, they'll do the opposite. They'll say, well, okay, I am Brahman. Yeah, metaphorically maybe, but really there's God and there's you and they're distinct. So everyone's bringing their own matrix of interpretation to the scripture. I'll give you a quick example of this. I was giving a presentation on the idea of rebirth at Elizabethtown College, where I teach, a few years ago. And someone I knew quite well, a student, was in the audience who, as she would often say, she would say, I believe in the Bible literally, right? The Bible, you should be read literally. So I was describing some portions of the Bible where that are highly suggestive of the idea of rebirth, right? It says, for example, that the prophet Elijah came back as John the Baptist. It sounds like rebirth, right? And then this friend of mine, this student who believes, in the Bible being read literally, said, I think Jesus was speaking metaphorically there. Metaphor in the Bible? Really? Who thought, Yes, of course, right? Because she already had an understanding of the Bible that excluded the idea of rebirth. So anything in the Bible suggestive of rebirth would have to be explained in some other way, right? And we all do this all the time. Sometimes people call it cherry picking, and it sounds like a bad thing. I call it having a rational mind, and if this text is important to you, you regard it as sacred, it must be engaged with, it must speak to you. It also has to make sense, right? And so that's where theologies and philosophies and systems of interpretation developed. So picking some, horrible verse from some text that you want to argue with and saying, look, it's bad. No, that doesn't really work. It makes the person who does it feel smug and become more egotistical, and it doesn't really advance dialogue at all. And I've seen this done to people of many different religions, including Hindus. I'm sure some of you have experienced this. Someone will pick some horrible sounding verse out of the Manusmriti and say, this is what you all think about people of different castes. Well, if you ask Swami Vivekananda that, he would say, no, I don't think that at all. It's not part of this tradition. So it's just not an intelligent way to argue, though the people who do it think they're being very smart. The very notion of religions as abstractions can be an impediment to understanding, right? We think all Christians think this, all Hindus think this, etc. And then we miss what's really going on. And for that, you need to talk to people and observe people and engage with the tradition. Given the differences in how each person might interpret the religious teachings with which they identify, I find myself agreeing with Gandhi's statement that in reality there are as many religions as there are individuals. This, however, raises another important question. If religions are mixtures of sand and sugar, if each person's understanding of their religion is to some extent unique to them, and even as part of a community of like-minded believers, how can we say that many paths lead to the goal of realization, right? It seems like we have these very imperfect things called religions, and human beings taking bits and pieces of them. How does that lead us to realization? So now we come to the heart of the matter. How is realization achieved according to our tradition? A few months ago, I presented here on the topic of how the 4 yogas work. The yogas, or spiritual disciplines leading to realization, are categorized by Swami Vivekananda as being of 4 basic types, and I assume most of you are probably very familiar with this. With karma yoga, through which we realize our divinity through our works and duty and detachment from the fruits of action. Bhakti Yoga, the realization of divinity through devotion and love of a personal God. Raja Yoga, the realization of divinity through the control of the mind. And Jnana Yoga, realization of our divinity through knowledge. And I was quoting from Swami Vivekananda just then, right? Those are his descriptions of those. Swamiji goes on to explain that what we call religions are actually collections of yogas. They're bundles of yogas, methods for attaining realization in various combinations. Swamiji says, quote, "The ultimate goal of all mankind, the aim and end of all religions is but one, reunion with God, or what amounts to the same, with the divinity which is every person's true nature. But while the aim is one, the method of attaining may vary with the different temperaments of people. Both the goals and the methods employed for reaching it are called yoga, a word derived from the same Sanskrit root as the English yoke, meaning to join us to our reality, God. There are various yogas or methods of union, but the chief ones are karma yoga, bhakti yoga, raja yoga, and jnana yoga. All the yogas serve in the manner most appropriate to a given practitioner to attenuate the ego, thus drawing us ever nearer toward the realization of our non-dual relationship with one another, with the cosmos, and with ultimate reality, with the infinite itself. The world's religions can be seen as collections of yogas, with bhakti being predominant in some traditions, like Christianity, jnana being predominant in others, like Judaism, meditative awareness being predominant in yet others, like Buddhism, and so on. We can also see that while the yogas can be categorized as 4 in number, there are in reality as many yogas as there are beings on the spiritual path, for we each have our own combination of these practices that are appropriate to us, as Swamiji has explained. Similarly, as we've already observed, even though we may categorize religious traditions under headings like Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, and so on, individual practitioners have in reality their own understandings and interpretations of the teachings of these traditions. So, what does this mean? If we affirm the ideal of the harmony of religions, our focus is not so much on the things people believe, but the effectiveness of the practice of those teachings for transforming consciousness. This is what Sri Ramakrishna was interested in. He didn't debate philosophy all that much in his life. But when he would meet someone, he said, what have you experienced? How do you see God? What is your relationship? And how does your practice get you to that? So these are all means of attenuating the ego and leading to realization. So the thing to ask yourself is, if you look at a particular practitioner of a religion and you want to understand how this process is working, you won't say, okay, what do they believe? You say, how are they being? How are they becoming? What kind of life are they living? One might ask, of course, going back to my rebirth example, how a worldview that includes incorrect ideas, like the rejection of rebirth, can nevertheless function to carry its adherents toward realization. The answer to the question will depend on each individual and the role that specific beliefs have in that person's practice. So again, even if you disagree with me, that's fine, but just see the logic of it. If you believe rebirth is real, how is a non-belief in rebirth going to help someone achieve realization? It's a paradoxical question. How does someone who does not believe in moksha get closer to moksha through following this practice, right? So, one might envision a person who, upon learning about the idea of rebirth, concludes that they can neglect spiritual life, taking the attitude that, I'll do that in another life, right? Oh, good, I don't have to do it now, right? I can just keep doing what I've been doing. That person might thereby inflict great damage upon themselves spiritually, maybe even piling on bad karma that will put the goal of realization even further away than it was before. So the idea of rebirth, even though we accept it as true, may be bad for that person, right? For such a person, it might be the case that following a religion that insists that this lifetime is one's only opportunity to get salvation is what is recommended to get that person in gear, right, in terms of spiritual practice. Let them later have some experience where they remember their past lives, but for now, start doing something, right? It's similar with the soul that has not evolved enough empathy or compassion to see the sufferings of others as their own, and therefore then refrain from doing harm to others. If they've not developed that capacity, maybe believing they might be punished by going to hell could be the first step toward them cultivating good habits, good sanskaras, that will then lead to deeper growth and a deeper understanding. And of course, there are ideas, as we've already mentioned, that are simply inimical to spiritual life, that are beyond the pale of the harmony of religions, and we just have to say no to them. No, don't kill people because they believe differently than you. It's just wrong. It goes against the grain of the universe, which is non-dual. Right? If you harm others, you're harming yourself. Much, much more can be said and needs to be said about the harmony of religions, but in my talk today, I hope I've established some sense of what the harmony of religions is and also some sense of what it's not. It's the affirmation of truth as something universally available and so discernible in many religious traditions. It's the affirmation that there are truths that are common among the world's religions and truths that are distinctive to each tradition, which means we can all learn from studying traditions deeply. And it's the affirmation that the most important thing about the teaching of the world religions is their effectiveness in transforming consciousness when we put them into practice. It's not the idea that all religions are the same and that there's no basis for thinking critically about religions. We can say what we think is wrong in religions. Right? That doesn't mean you're attacking someone, but you're speaking truth from your point of view. But that doesn't mean you're trying to tear down the whole thing, right? Maybe you're critical of this one idea, but then you see there's deep truth somewhere else. And it involves an understanding that religions as such do not exist apart from the lived practices of human beings on the spiritual path, aspiring for the highest realization, however they might conceive of that highest realization from within their particular worldviews. I just want to say, well, no, maybe I'll save that for question and answer. I wanted to add something else, but I think it's better if it just comes up in the conversation. So I think we'll conclude right there. So thank you all very much for listening. Yes.
So my acquaintance is convinced that his religion alone is true, and everyone else is headed toward damnation. And I want friendly relations with this person, but how do I tiptoe around this contention of this person?
It's very, very difficult. And I've had this experience with people, especially when I was growing up, that there were some who were just convinced of that. They would want me to, change my mind about everything and go to their church and so on. And it depends on the relationship. If you've known this person for a long time and you've already built a foundation of common interests in maybe other things, you can still, I think, enjoy that relationship and deepen in that. And you may find the time comes when you can actually have that conversation in a way that is productive and comfortable for both of you. Or you may not. I have people with whom I've engaged very productively with these ideas, and there are people I still tiptoe around because and by tiptoe, what I mean is not being afraid to speak your mind, but being able to discern when that would be helpful and when it might just be harmful, because there are cases where that all you're going to end up doing is alienating that person, right? Also, I think very often there are other things, there's sort of psychological and emotional things that are also operating behind the scenes of many of these beliefs that people have. So they may, especially if you're talking about someone in your own family, it might be the case that, let's say you've taken up the path of Vedanta, they think now that you're going to hell, but what they're really worried about is, are you still part of the family, right? And if you continue to participate in family events and, show up for Thanksgiving or Christmas or Hanukkah or whatever it might be, that abates somewhat. They think there's still hope for you, which there's probably not, right? Because if you're firmly persuaded, like I am, of your point of view, and I think there's something else too. This is part of why I kind of recoil from this idea of people going to hell for their religion. Is it? If I try to imagine, and I've done this, I try to imagine inhabiting that worldview, and then looking around at all of these wonderful people and think, oh, they're all going to hell. It's so sad, right? You just feel terrible, right? And of course that's what prompts people to go around and try to convert people. But another option is to say maybe that's not really right. Maybe that's not the correct way of thinking. And as they get to know lovable you even more, maybe the grip of that idea will loosen in time, because they'll see that, well, Bill's a great guy, so that can't be, right? That he's damned for all time. So there are different things, and it could be that in this lifetime it never gets resolved. They just always think that, and you think what you think. And again, every relationship is different. But I think it's important to. It's a very difficult thing. I like this term from Buddhism, the middle path, right? That the balance of affirming what you are convinced is true, while at the same time, as the physicians say, doing no harm. Right? That knowing when to speak about these things, and I've made mistakes in this regard. Right? I've plowed forward either arguing with friends who were fundamentalists, or as Vedantins, we're kind of caught between two worlds, because you have religious fundamentalists and then you have really hardcore anti-religious people, right? People think that it's just all a waste of time. But even though those two groups of people have opposite worldviews, dealing with them is very similar. If you're coming from a Vedanta perspective, because you want to affirm whatever truth you see in what they believe, and you want to at the same time, not get engulfed by that, right? Not let that, pull you down. And so that's difficult. I think that's another strategy too, is when you find areas where you do agree, to really affirm those, and turn that into a bridge between yourself and the other person.
You briefly touched upon rebirth. Can you speak a little bit more about that, your perspective, and how the teachings of Vedanta kind of lead to that as well?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the very last part.
It's intersection with
Vedanta. Okay, yes, very good. So Vedanta, rebirth is an ancient concept, and it's been there in Vedanta from the beginning. Right? If you go back to the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, it explains how our desires shape our next rebirth, that our desires shape our actions, which bring about the karmic effects, which bring about rebirth. And so I found this idea attractive from a very early age. I've spoken here before about how a big part of my journey was in my childhood, the death of my father, which sort of accelerated my interest in these questions. I'd always been kind of interested in these questions, but having been presented with the traditional Christian view of the afterlife, it was, heaven or hell. And of course, in the Catholic Church, you have this kind of middle concept of purgatory, where, you're not yet perfect, but you go to this place where you sort of work out your issues and you are perfected. And my thinking was, if we still have all that work to do after we pass on, which I think most of us do, what were we doing in this life? So I started thinking, well, maybe we're already in purgatory, right? Maybe we just keep coming back till we get it right? And so this was even before I really knew anything about other traditions. It just what made sense to me. And then if I fast forward to the first time I read the Bhagavad Gita when I was 14, it just all fell into place, right? It made sense. And so and then as I've continued for the last few decades to think about and investigate this idea, there's a theological argument for it, which is the idea of rebirth perfectly reconciles the concepts of divine mercy and divine justice. That is, you have the idea of divine mercy, that you always get another chance, right? But then you also have this idea of justice. You need to atone for the harm you've done. So I really like how karma and rebirth reconcile those, because you have to keep coming back till you get it right, but you have potentially infinite, you have as many times as you need to do that, right? So you do keep coming back and doing it. And I like the kind of evolutionary perspective that you see this in Sri Aurobindo and Paramahansa Yogananda, and it's sort of suggested in Swami Vivekananda, but he didn't live long enough, unfortunately, to elaborate on it further. But how, we're sort of developing, evolving through lifetimes toward realization. So, and as part of a spiritual practice, it has transformed my life, because everybody I meet now, a thought I have is, I might have known this person before. And there's a saying of the Buddha where he says, you should treat all beings that you meet with love and respect, because at some point or another, they were your mother or your father. And so to see everyone as your mother and your father, right? And so so I find that believing in it has a practical outcome that's very positive for me. But another piece of this, which is very interesting, is that there is an emerging body of research on what appears to be past life memory in children. The pretty well-known scholar who developed this field of study was Ian Stevenson at University of Virginia, and then his predecessor, or his successor, Jim Tucker, has continued that work, and he's kind of tightened the scientific methodology a bit. And it's fascinating. I'd say read his book, Return to Life. And, he's convinced, and he has, to my knowledge, no background with, if I argue for these things, everyone say, yeah, but, you're into Vedanta and all that, so of course you believe in rebirth. But he's a scientist, and he, in the last 2 chapters of Return to Life, he says, okay, what must we conclude based on the data that he's discovered? And he makes an argument based on quantum theory for an essential Vedantic claim. The universe is basically a manifestation of consciousness. And dying and being reborn is like having a dream, and then that dream ending, and then another dream starting. When I woke up today here in this center, basically I started another dream, which I'm still having right now. And so this is the understanding from a Vedanta point of view, that we are going through this play of consciousness lifetime after lifetime. And what we're learning is ourselves, right? Because it's really ultimately all us, right? Us, not the ego, but that divine consciousness that has manifested as all of this. So it's an idea that I'm quite convinced of for theological, philosophical, and an emerging body of scientific reasons. There are, of course, still a lot of people who are skeptical about it. In terms of harmony of religions, and as I was writing this, I tried unsuccessfully to find the passage, but I believe Swami Medananda quotes from Sri Ramakrishna in one of his books about this, that whether you believe in rebirth or not is really of very little consequence to the path to realization. I find it helpful in the way that I've just described, but as I mentioned in my talk, there may be people for whom it's a problem. So, in fact, I had a discussion with someone about this once. They said, I like a lot of what you're saying, but I don't believe in rebirth, and nothing you say will convince me. And I said, fine, don't believe in rebirth. Good. Okay, end of story. Because, and this is something, too, that I think that we get in our culture from some forms of Christianity, in which salvation is kind of a reward for having the right worldview. And that's not how God realization works in Vedanta. It's a transformation of the whole being. And our worldview and our way of thinking can be a useful tool for that. So I find the idea of rebirth for me is a useful tool for that. But ideas finally are only tools. Right? In the Buddhist tradition, they say too, when you reach a certain level of realization, they say the Dharma, the teaching, is like a thorn that you're using to remove another thorn that's become stuck in your foot. Once you've got that thorn unstuck, you can throw away both the thorns, right? You don't need them. Because the ultimate truth is beyond words and beyond concepts. It's infinite. But yeah, rebirth is a concept I find endlessly fascinating. So, yeah. Yes?
You mentioned about with non-duality that everybody is you. So everybody you meet is essentially you when with non-duality.
Right.
With that belief, doesn't it make it, just in my mind, logically, wouldn't it make you more determined to make that person feel good, and then wouldn't that halt your own spiritual progress?
So there's making people feel good, but then there's also helping raise their awareness. And those don't always fit, right? So I don't think it's our job to make anyone feel good. I'll little self-confession here. I tried for many, many years to keep other people happy. It doesn't work. You can not harm. Right? You can try to refrain from harming another person mentally, physically, and so on. But I think we have a duty to speak the truth as we see it, even if someone disagrees with us. If we say it in the right way, if we're not trying to say, oh, you're wrong, you're stupid, just say, well, this is how I see it. This is how I think. If they take offense, then I would say that's their problem. It's not my fault, right? But I don't want to go out of my way to offend. Right? So, yes, it would inhibit our spiritual progress if we're just trying to keep people happy all the time. I think the idea is you want to do what is best, what is most beneficial for people. And they may not enjoy it in the moment. And I'm a teacher, so I know I make people write papers and show up for class and things like that. But they're better for it in the long run. Right? It's like parenting, right? So, if we just try to make our children happy all the time, we're going to create, a terrible creature and inflict it upon the world. You need some, restraint there as well. But it can always be done gently and with the idea that I'm doing this for your good, not to be harmful or hateful. Right? Another thing, too, is when we find people, if we have this belief that we're all ultimately one being, when I'm talking with you, even if you're disagreeing with me, I need to listen attentively to that because that is, in effect, part of myself sharing its truth with me. It might not be something I agree with, but it might be something I'm being prompted to think about more deeply. And that's been very productive for me. Having arguments with people from different perspectives has been very helpful to me in my life because it's made me rethink things. And sometimes I modify my ideas, and sometimes I hold them even more strongly because I've again rethought it and gone through the process. But yeah, I think trying to make other people happy, there's this wonderful Aesop's fable about that. There's like the man, his son, and their donkey, and they're going to the market. And they're walking along and someone sees them and two other people are walking, and they kind of make a comment that, oh, look at these two fools, right? They should be riding on that donkey instead of leading it. So they say, okay, maybe we better ride the donkey. And then they pass a couple other people. Look at those cruel men. They're both riding on that poor donkey and weighing him down. So the man gets off and says, okay, son, you can ride on the donkey. Someone else says, oh, look at this man spoiling his son. His son's riding on the donkey and he's walking. So the man said, okay, let's switch places. And so then he's riding. And so and I don't there's a part of it I'm not remembering, but at the end of the story, they actually throw the donkey off a bridge, and no one is happy. And so I take that to heart. So being good, being kind, showing benevolence and compassion. I mean, that itself is a real discipline, because sometimes we're in a bad mood, right? Sometimes we don't feel like it, but that doesn't mean and we definitely shouldn't let people get away with nonsense, right? I was giving a talk once about the Holy Mother and some of the characteristics that she talks about, like finding fault with yourself rather than others. And someone said, this sounds like a recipe for just being abused all your life. It's like, no, that's not the idea, right? The idea is to use this as a practice in order to improve. But Ramakrishna could sometimes be very firm with people if he thought they were, going astray or causing a problem, but never with cruelty or never with hatred.
So, just one more thing. My question was more about yourself, not more into servitude. Make you spend too much time on your spiritual path, and then kind of lead you astray from things that your body desires. Right.
Well, so that's a good point too, which is that, and I think. Swami Vivekananda really sort of picked up some of these ideas of Sri Ramakrishna and developed them even further. And when he talks about karma yoga, it's all about putting these ideas into action in the world. And part of that is maintaining the body as a fit vehicle. This again to quote from Buddhism. Part of the middle path is you don't completely neglect the body, right? You don't starve yourself to death, but you maintain the body, you maintain physical fitness. All of these things are necessary, both to have a happy and fulfilling life, but also to then use that life to do good. So, there's this. It's very much something we hear about a lot nowadays is self-care. Well, sometimes that I think gets taken too far. Right? It sounds like everyone's sort of off caring for themselves, and that's all. But it's necessary. There's something. There's this thing I always think of, and I've heard others quote this as well. When you're on an airplane and they say, make sure your own oxygen mask is on before you try to help someone else. It's like, because you're not going to be helping them if you're writhing on the floor from lack of oxygen. Right? So, we maintain ourselves enough to do what we want to do, and then what we want to do is do good in the world. Yeah, I think so. Balance is a very, very important concept.
So I have a question.
Yes.
Yeah, as you mentioned, like the pale of harmony of the religion, and some religions things like to kill others, and to use as a slave, and etc. whatever, and go see psychiatrist, and basically then we are living in the hand of the psychiatrist and the science actually. It has its own pitfall and limitations, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, what is is there any right solution? Is there any need for reformation of the religion, all the religions, the limitations and the reformation of the religion?
Wonderful question. And my psychiatrist comment was slightly flippant, but it was basically to say that, don't even consider those ideas. No, they're wrong, right? But to give a little more, and this is something that I'm really glad you asked the question, because this is something else I wanted to say a little more about, and then I pulled back because of time, but I'm glad you asked the question. Why do these wonderful sets of spiritual practices that the religions are, how do they spin off into these really terrible entities that they also sometimes become? And I think this is the intersection of the high ideals of spirituality with what in Vedanta we call Maya, right? So the world of politics, the world of history, the world of culture. So it gets embroiled in all kinds of conflicts. And it gets turned into an institution, and then people have vested power interests in that institution that plays a role with the state, it plays a role with policy. And so it becomes all about things that really have nothing to do with spirituality, right? And so I'll give you an interesting example, I mean, just from my own life. Because I'm very proudly part of a Hindu tradition, and I'm very open about that, I've sometimes had people, I think, assume that I had certain kinds of political commitments connected with India and political parties there and so on, which I don't actually. I mean, I sort of read about it because it's interesting, but it's not something that connects with me on a deep level. So I gave a talk at one place about why I adopted this path, just my life story. And someone who attended, I think, had some of these ideas that I was, connected with Hindu parties in India and that sort of thing. So he heard my story and he raised his hand and he was sort of puzzled. And he said, so your journey had nothing to do with Hindu politics or Indian politics or anything like that. And I said, nope. And that was my answer. I didn't. And then I said, next question. Because it's about realization. It's about transformation. And I'm political in the sense that I think ideas like harmony of religions need to get out there, because I see them as the antidote to the tribalism that we see out there in the world. But what happens to religions, I think the reason they're often as false as they are true, is it's those elements that have that emerge from, a lot of what we study as scholars of religion, politics, economics, society. There's a group in a particular society, and they're keeping water from our group, and they worship the wrong way. Oh, they're really bad, right? It just becomes a big thing, which had that political issue not been there, those two communities might have gotten along fine, right? And we see this throughout history. So, yeah, Kusamita, I think.
Thank you for pulling everything together so skillfully. Just wanted to add one little thing. When we speak of rebirth, there are also some indigenous traditions that accept it.
Yes.
So the Yoruba religion originates in West Africa, but it's practiced in North America and Brazil and the Caribbean. And I've been told by a leading authority that, and this was years ago, so there are probably more people now, 80 million people are adherents of the Yoruba religion. They believe in reincarnation.
Yes.
Some American Indian peoples in the Pacific Northwest, as we know, there's hundreds of different indigenous American groups, and some of them believe in rebirth, and I guess some don't, and we should look into that more thoroughly. Mm-hmm. So it's actually a global,
it's
option.
It's a global belief, yeah. It's more believed than not, and that surprises people often in the United States, where about maybe 1/4 of Americans, believe in rebirth, but based on opinion polls. But around the world, it's very widely held. And I mentioned how sort of mainstream Christian and Islamic institutions have spoken against the idea, but in Christianity, the Gnostics going way, way back, the Swedenborgians, there are a lot of different groups that affirm it. In Islam, you have the Druze community, which a lot of their tradition is based on the idea of rebirth. So,
in Judaism, you're allowed to believe in it if you want to.
Yes, exactly. It's one of the options. It's one of the options. There's not one set view on it. Yeah.
That statistic you just quoted, 1 in 4 Americans believes in reincarnation. Yeah. So like you, I'm an academic in religious studies, so I've been attending to that since we started this, which is a long time ago. That figure has remained constant for decades.
Yeah, it doesn't go up or down.
25% more or less of Americans. Yeah. Which means a lot of people in church.
That's a lot
believe
of
in reincarnation.
Yeah, and a lot of people in church. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you. So continuing on with rebirth, I'm interested in any kind of text, whether it's scripture or commentaries, that go into a philosophical explanation of how it works.
Okay.
To distinguish it from a belief versus philosophy, because I find that when you look at the understanding of ontology the nature of being itself. Vedanta is phenomenal
Yes.
in terms of its metaphysics. But when it comes to this particular belief, I study with a Vedanta teacher says, this is a belief. This
Right.
is not philosophy. This is not something we can prove to you the way that we prove the nature of non-dual Brahman,
Right,
for
right.
example.
That's right.
Would you agree, and or would you recommend, where would I go into
Okay.
if I'm a student of philosophy, hardcore, want to understand how does this work?
Okay, very, very good. So a couple of answers, well, three answers really. In terms of what your teacher said, I think there may be ways to prove it. I think this is sort of starting to emerge with the work of people like Jim Tucker. But I do think that for achieving the goal, it's optional. You can believe it or not believe it. I find it helpful, but I could certainly imagine people for whom it would not be beneficial. In terms of texts, there's an excellent essay with a very simple title. It's just called Karma and Rebirth by Sri Aurobindo. And if you can find like an anthology of his writings, you'll find that. What I love about Sri Aurobindo's writing is he knows the Sanskrit tradition thoroughly, but he also knows the Western tradition thoroughly. And so he's able to articulate it in a way that makes sense to people who've grown up in this environment. Then if you want to really deep dive, the Jain tradition, which I've also studied quite a bit, is a massive literature on karma, on rebirth, on the mechanism of how it works. Some of that is a little different from Vedanta teaching, but a lot of it does overlap. Where it's different is the jiva, the soul, is seen as not a material thing in Jainism, but it is believed to have extension in space and time, which is different from Advaita Vedanta, where we're perceiving something like that, but that's not the reality. But beyond that, like if you can sort of work within that matrix, then it's believed that this jiva, this soul, interacts with karma, which is seen actually as a material energy or substance in Jainism. And so, and there are extensive lists of the different types of karma. Well, what it is that might draw a particular karma to the jiva, what you need to do to get rid of it. It's a vast literature. So I would say if you want to begin those studies, there's a really good scholar named Christy Wiley. She's written a lot on Jain karma theory. Those articles might be somewhat technical if you're at a kind of beginning level, but they're very useful. They're sort of guides to the primary sources. There are the primary sources themselves. There's a vast literature in Jainism. A lot of it has not been translated into a Western language yet, so that could be a bit of a climb. As an introduction to this tradition, there's Padmanabh Jaini's The Jain Path of Purification, and I suppose I should plug my own book, Jainism: An Introduction. So that I would call that the grade school level, right? And then, but that could be a jumping off point into studying that tradition more deeply. They say more about karma, I think, than any other karma and rebirth than any other tradition that I'm aware of in great detail. So yeah.
If I could ask a quick other question.
Sure.
Sorry, on the harmony of religions. So,
Yes.
we say that you can reach realization through any one of or any combination of, and almost basically recommend that you follow the one that kind of works for you,
Works
or
for you.
so your temperament.
Right.
And I can understand that, and so you arrive at, let's say, realization that way. The only problem I see is that you may not end up as a well-rounded human being this way, meaning that if I use a kind of stereotypical, the Gyanis can potentially have a problem with arrogance or being a know-it-all.
Yes.
The Bhakta may be very kind of loving, but maybe not the sharpest knife in the drawer sometimes.
Or maybe
and
maybe
so on. Right?
or
I'm
may-
just
or
being
maybe-
stereotypical
or
to
maybe
be
fanatical
provocative,
too, right?
or fanatical,
That's the danger in
as
Bhakti, yeah,
well.
yeah.
And so if we are recommending people just go with what's working for you and
Right.
get to that realization,
Right.
the danger I see is that you're not really cultivating well-rounded human
Right.
beings.
I agree with you, and my diagnosis of that would be that you haven't yet found the one that really does work. That there probably you need to supplement something with something else in order to come to that balance. Because if your spiritual practice is transforming your character in a negative way, to paraphrase Swami Vivekananda, take that God and throw him into the Pacific Ocean. That's what he once said about, a God that doesn't answer prayers. He says, throw him into the Pacific Ocean. As soon as you pick the Pacific Ocean, I guess because it's the biggest one. But I would say that, and to even become aware of that, to have that kind of self-critical mode, saying, oh, I'm getting a little like a know-it-all, or I'm getting a little fanatical. That, I think, is an important component of every yoga, whichever one we follow. We need to be self-critical. Early on in my journey to this tradition, I got to know a Hindu family in the small town where I was growing up. I became good friends with them. And their grandmother visited for several months from Gujarat. And she kept a daily record of her faults. Where did she think that she went astray that day? And she would keep a record of it. And if she thought that it was getting to be too many, so she would, do some more japa and do things to try to rein that in. And so I know there are Jains who do this practice as well. It's like record keeping. It's like in your store, if you're a business, if you're a shopkeeper, debits and credits. And in the tradition I grew up in the Catholic Church, it's called the examination of conscience. It's just to be really honest with yourself and say, okay, am I doing this right? Or is it going to my head in the wrong way? And yeah, there are specific dangers associated with each of the yogas. So you mentioned with jnana, being a know-it-all. Okay, that's one. Bhakti, what Swami Vivekananda mentions is the danger is fanaticism. Okay, I love my Ishta Devata, and everyone else who doesn't is bad, right? I mean, so that's a danger. We see this. It's a common problem in the world's religions. The danger of karma yoga is burnout, right? You work and you work and you work and you die, right? I sometimes think this is what happened to Swamiji when he passed away at such a young age. And then with Raja Yoga, and this is something I'm very drawn to, so I'm very aware of this particular flaw in myself, total withdrawal from everybody and everything. Yeah, that's very appealing to me sometimes. So it's something you need to... I was talking with a friend of mine who has a similar temperament to me, and we were talking about the pandemic and the lockdown, and our spouses were sort of horrified as we were reminiscing about how nice it was during the lockdown, because you just by yourself. And so that's the danger with Raja Yoga. Total introversion. Karma Yoga, it's like total extroversion, and you spend yourself on the world. And then, fanaticism with the unrestrained emotions, and arrogance with the unrestrained intellect. So I personally think it's nice to balance the yogas with each other to some extent. And some of the greatest teachers I've met do that, right? They're great jnanis, but they're also great bhaktas, and vice versa. Yeah.
Talking about the four yogas, I just feel that human nature in general is multifaceted.
Yes.
And that's why Swami Vivekananda says all the four paths or the four yogas is applicable. One of them may take a prominence based on your nature, but no one human being can take only one path.
Exactly.
Do you agree with that?
Exactly, and for the very reason this gentleman gave, that we don't want to be one-sided. And we
not only don't we, it's not possible for us to be just one-sided. We work, we love, we do all those things. It's just that the yogas teach us how to do each of it.
Yes.
None of us do just only one thing.
It's taking what we already do and turning it into a discipline for realization. Yeah, I think that's what I see you saying. Is that? Yeah. Beautiful.
That's all. I just had a comment.
Thank you. One thing I had wanted to add, and then I thought better of it, but I do want to say it because I can say it quickly. When I talk about harmony of religions, a question I often get, no one's asked it today, but is, well, what if you meet someone, what if there's someone who does not accept the harmony of religions, and so they think their way is the only right way, and so on? And my reply to that is that's the situation we're in, right? And that's why we need to keep talking about this. And that's why you turn on the news and see what you see, because everyone's convinced of their own point of view, and everyone else is wrong. And that's true in politics, it's true in religion, it's true in a wide array of fields. You have to start listening to each other. Okay, yeah.
There is a spiritual construct and a moralistic construct. And religions, to my mind, are stories. And every religion is a story.
Yeah.
And the part that binds you to any one particular story is the morality part of that that you believe in. Harmony of religions is something to do with spirituality.
Yes.
And not a moralistic concept,
Right.
I guess. But
Yeah.
religions entrench you in a moral dilemma. And like Sam Altman, you can be an atheist. So to what extent does religion, I think he may have answered it in a book, but to what extent does religion determine a human being's moral conduct, or does it have nothing to bear with it?
I think it's a symbiotic relationship, right? So people who grow up in a religious tradition might find their moral foundation shaped by that tradition. If they have experiences that cause them to question that, they might question the moral foundation as well. There might be a period of rebellion against that. And I tend to think in terms of a developmental model where we, early in our path, we basically are just repeating what we've been taught in our actions and in our words. And then there's the period of questioning, and maybe we sort of rebel. And maybe there's a little bit of a wild period, right? And then we have some more life experience. We experience some suffering. We see the cause and effect of how our actions come back to us and those around us. And then we return to that foundation, but with a deeper understanding. Right? And there was a great French philosopher named Paul Ricoeur who talked about this. He called it the second naivete, right? When you come back to spirituality, but with this deeper understanding that comes from having questioned, say, the externals, the institution, the politics, and so on. You realize at a certain point that all that is fake and has nothing to do with spirituality, but then you need something to substitute for it, or you're just lost, right? And so you return, but with a deeper understanding. And I think this is something that I see in the lives of a lot of the great, look at most of the great saints from all the traditions. They had a naughty phase, right? And then they had some realization that brought them back to the path with an even deeper realization than they had before. So we start with the moral, then we question that, but then we return to it and move to the spiritual. I think that I wouldn't want to automatically impose that on everyone, but I think that's a very common model of what happens. Kusamita, yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to respond to this question about ethics is incredibly important. So I will try to keep this very short. So, of course, the debate about the definition of what is religion has been going on for well over a century.
Right.
And I'm a strong supporter and adherent of the definition that is put forward by a great anthropologist, Clifford Geertz, also by Ninian Smart, who was a great scholar of the religions of India. That religion, as you said, is worldview, which is not quite the same thing as doctrine or formal belief, but everyone has some kind of a worldview, a view of what is real. And it may be well worked out or it might be incoherent, but there it is. You have to have it.
Right.
The second necessary constituent of any religion is the ethics.
Right.
There's a system of values, or moral values, or an ethics. So, and then there is what people from India always say, well, Hinduism isn't a religion, it's more like a way of life. But that third essential thing in religion is the way of life, or the practices that attune you to the worldview and by which you enact those moral values.
Yeah.
So all religions, every single religion is ethically constituted. There's no such thing as a religion that doesn't have an ethics or a set of moral values. Now that doesn't mean people all follow it.
Right.
In the first 10 or 15 minutes of my course in the Survey of the World's Religions, I say to the students, most people don't follow their own religions. Right. And they remember that.
Right. That's right.
the ideals are there, people don't live up to them. But I'm involved in the field of comparative religious ethics, and I'm a part of the Parliament of the World's Religions, where our founding document is the global ethic. Right. So I'd like to affirm, and sort of here I stand, that the world's religious traditions do share, as you said at the beginning of your talk, certain basic moral norms. Yeah. And that's not the same thing as everybody living up to them, but there is and you are right, absolutely correct to say the limit of harmony of religions is when you cross that ethical line.
Yes.
Yeah, so
well
thank
said.
you.
Very well said. Yeah. Yes.
Maybe I don't think
But there it is.
Okay, I do. All right. Stand corrected. So you talked about, obviously, the harmony of religion, but it seems to me that the most important thing to achieve the harmony of religion is willingness to listen intently, right? Intentional deep listening. Intentional deep listening is, I think, the most important part to accomplish or achieve the harmony of religion. Well, where, for someone like me who's, an absolute novice, where in the Vedanta one can get some direction to be a true, better listener?
So I would go straight to the Kathamrita, to the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, because he exhibited that very quality. Right? He was not content to realize God in just one way. Right? He had the vision of Ma Kali when he was around 19 years old or so, but then he wanted to continue having that realization in as many ways as he could, and he followed various teachers, two whose names we know well because he had very famous interactions with them, were the Bhairavi Brahmani, who instructed him in tantric practice, and Totapuri, who instructed him in Advaita Vedanta. And yet to completely commit himself to each of these paths, I would see that as the ultimate in listening, right? He just set aside everything else and took that in. Your question actually brings up another thought in my mind, right? That there are a couple of, when we say harmony of religions, we can mean two different things. And one, which I've been talking about more, is a kind of idea of how truth is dispersed among different traditions. But then there's harmony in terms of actual practice, right? Harmonious relations among religious communities. And sometimes I've had this conversation with people who are quite cynical, and they say, what do you mean there's no harmony of religions? But they're talking about in the world actually, right? Well, we have to work for that, right? And this kind of deep listening that you mentioned, I think people will only do it, not only, but I mean humanity as a whole will be forced to do it when realize it's the only way we'll survive. Because I don't want to be too alarmist, but my perception of global interreligious conflict and the environmental situation that we've created, these two things converging, is that we're going to run out of time if we're not careful, right? We're sort of fooling around fighting about our tribal differences when we're in this slowly, this vat of water that's slowly reaching the boiling point. And so we have to do this. And my hope for humanity is that we will be forced to do this. We'll have to listen to each other and work with each other. Otherwise, it's going to be a very sad story. Right. But then we'll all be reborn somewhere else, right? So it's never the end. But we don't want to let it get to that point, because that will mean we have failed the test that was being human on planet Earth, right? And we don't want to fail that test, right? Yeah. Right. Okay. Thank you all very much. I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. As usual, your subject took on a life of its own here, and I think everybody enjoyed the discourse. I know I did. I think everybody here did. And there's no question you'll be coming back.
Well, thank you, Diane.
Ask you to come back.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you again. It's always such a pleasure to have you here.
Well, I'm grateful to be here. Jai Ma.
Jai Ma.
Yeah, thank you.